This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. Are you left wanting more at the end of each episode of this show? Are these short sessions getting you fired up to try new skills for yourself and share the journey with others who are working through the same challenges? Well, the good news is that this podcast is only the beginning. The real action and learning is happening on the Regenerative Skills Discord channel, where you can connect with the whole community to dive deeper into the topics on the show, explore solutions, and share your journey and blooper reel with an active group that can't wait to hear from you. You can get your questions answered and share knowledge and wisdom of your own on a safe platform that, unlike the social media giants, won't steal your personal data to advertise to you in creepy ways. Ditch Facebook and join us where the real skill builders are. Just find the link to the Discord chat on the homepage at regenerativeskills.com. Hey there and welcome back, everybody. Now, I've been lucky in recent months to be able to speak to people who've been leaders and change makers in the regenerative space for a significant amount of time. Building on that knowledge and experience, I got to speak today with Dr. Mark Nelson. Mark is chairman of the Institute of Ecotechnics, head of Wastewater Gardens International, and has worked for several decades in closed ecological systems research, bioregenerative space life support, ecological engineering, restoration of damaged ecosystems, desert agriculture and wastewater recycling, and notably, Dr. Nelson was a member of the 8-person biospherian crew of the first 2-year Biosphere 2 closure experiment between 1991 and 1993. That project included pioneering regenerative agriculture and waste and water recycling technology. And even before that, in the 1970s, he planted an organic fruit orchard at Synergia Ranch in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and has helped to manage its organic fruit and vegetable farm for decades. As an associate editor of Life Sciences in Space Research, he is also an author and contributor for numerous books, including Pushing Our Limits, Insights from Biosphere 2, The Wastewater Gardener, Preserving the Planet One Flush at a Time, and Life Under Glass, a crucial lesson in planetary stewardship, written by Mark and 2 fellow biospherians. Now, I first planned this interview with Mark to focus on his work with wastewater management and gardening, but I quickly realized that it was only a small part of the work and the experience in his expertise. And as a result, we cover a lot of ground in this session, ranging from the work and the development of the Biosphere 2 installation and what it was like being part of the research team who lived there for 2 years. And Mark also talks about his work and learning from decades of international ecological projects, including those focused on wastewater management, and how all these diverse places and contexts continue to inform the Ecotechnics initiatives. We also get around to focusing on his book, The Wastewater Gardener, Preserving the Planet One Flush at a Time, published by Synergetic Press. There we dissect the key considerations for safe harvesting and reuse of wastewater and the potential uses of it in gardens and beyond. Making use of wastewater is becoming more and more essential as the energy-intensive and expensive methods of purification are quickly becoming unfeasible. Though people are becoming aware of this necessity and its potential, it's still going to require a lot more visibility to be adopted at the scale that it is needed. And so I hope that episodes like this will act as a catalyst to help get more listeners like yourselves to consider how using wastewater might fit into your own projects. I've also linked to where you can get your own copy of the book in the show notes for this episode. But for now, let's get to my conversation with Dr. Mark Nelson. Welcome, Dr. Nelson. Thanks so much for taking time. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing great. In the
Well,
middle
look
of a
there.
beautiful fruit harvest here in New Mexico.
What part of New Mexico are you in?
We're just south of Santa Fe.
Oh, okay. I used to work in near the Earthship community around Taos. I was wondering if you had any connections to that area.
No, but I know the people at Earthship.
Yeah. Similar objectives with some of the buildings that they go for there. Now, to get us started today, before we go into the details of wastewater gardens and some of the research and the projects that you've built, can you give our audience a sense of your background and how you got started with this line of work?
Yeah, sure. In a nutshell, let's see, I was born in New York City, born in Brooklyn, raised up in Queens, son of Jewish immigrants from Poland and Russia, so first generation American. got a scholarship to Dartmouth College and, excelled, etc. But decided after graduation that I wanted to do something new. Didn't know what exactly. And through a series of fortunate circumstances, I met a group that was starting to do ecological work out here in New Mexico, in fact. And then later we founded the Institute of Ecotechnics, because the idea was that we knew enough about ecology that we would work in challenging biomes of the planet and make practical, stand on alone, economically viable endeavors that one solved ecological problems and tried to upgrade the surrounding ecology. So after about 10 years here in New Mexico, I went to our first ecotechnic project in the tropical savanna of Australia, way up in the tropical Northwest. And by this time, the Institute had built a ship. We'd done other biomic projects, also located a project in a world city in London. And then we came up with the idea of Biosphere 2, a laboratory to study the global ecology and, kind of learn the nuts and bolts of how biospheres operate by making a pretty grand experiment. We made a virtually airtight facility that included a rainforest, a savanna, a desert, a mangrove wetland, an ocean with a living coral reef. And then because there were 8 people inside, and I was fortunate to be part of the first crew for a 2-year closure, we also had to have a farm and all of the technologies needed to operate a research facility. So the 2 years inside Biosphere 2 tie into Wastewater Gardens, because among my jobs was I was the manager of the sewage works. And the sewage works inside Biosphere 2 was this really beautiful constructed wetland, with flowering plants that I harvested and fed to our chickens and goats and pigs. And it did a remarkable job of cleaning up the wastewater such that we could send the treated water back to return the nutrients to our farm. And that inspired me to go back to academia after, a mere absence of 30 years or so, and get a master's and a PhD in ecological engineering and start to bring these systems, which I rechristened as wastewater gardens, because we wanted to, one, create a wetland, but we wanted to make them beautiful. Things that hotels and businesses and homes, would enhance the landscape and add to the beauty, and doing it all with water that's usually just thrown away and which causes a lot of health and environmental problems.
Sure, and that includes a whole lot of energy put into purification or detoxification, even if we do clean it up, right?
Yeah, there's a good point, which wasn't, we were a bit ahead of the curve at Biosphere 2, and we were worrying about global warming. But, now I also include, and thank you for bringing it up, that constructed wetlands are a low energy, because we're using natural functions, way of actually using, not just detoxifying and making safe sewage. Sewage treatment plants are enormously expensive and use incredible amounts of greenhouse gases, because typically, especially urban ones, you're pumping sewage from 20, 30 miles, kilometers to one centralized place, rather than using the wastewater, enhancing the ecology, closer to where it's created.
Absolutely. So let's take a step back here and go a little deeper into these biosphere projects. So this was Biosphere 2. I'm assuming that means that was the first one. And you've written, I think, 2 books, right, about your experiences in this, the 2 years that you spent there, and, well, what lifestyle was like, what the experiments were
Right.
about. Give me a maybe more in-depth overview of what the premise was here and what you were trying to find out through this experiment.
And I love that you're asking that classic question, where was Biosphere 1? Because it's kind of a trick question. The answer is we're living in Biosphere 1. It is currently the life support system of every human being and every microbe and every plant and every fungi. And that is the biosphere of planet Earth. And it's a powerful engine that has spread life, made the planet more habitable. When we look at Earth, it's not a planet. It is a planet shaped by a biosphere that's been ceaselessly, doing its beautiful thing, making new species for 4 billion years. Anyway, so Biosphere 2, and we named it that to underline because it's hard to remember, but we started that project in 1984. It was a pretty mammoth, ambitious project. So there was, a lot of research for 5 or 6 years, and then we built this. It's basically 1 hectare of airtight space, um, and we sealed it and started a 2-year experiment in 1991. And the purposes were kind of threefold. The first one was to make a laboratory. I mean, people who are not in the sciences may think that science has all the answers, but as every real scientist knows, we've only scratched the surface of what our knowledge of ourselves, of our surrounds, of the biosphere, of the cosmos. And there's just so much that we don't know about how biospheres operate. So one, it would be a laboratory for studying in great detail. Obviously, it's not a model of planet Earth, but because you can think of planet Earth as having these large aggregations like rainforests and savannas and grasslands and marine and aquatic ecosystems, it was kind of an interplay of 5 of those, plus the human dominated ones, the farm and the human habitat, our little mini city where we had our rooms and workshops and laboratories and entertainment. The second purpose was, I do think that we have started on one planet, but life ceaselessly explores and expands. So I think that the great potential, and the time frame is uncertain, but that humanity will take a biosphere and biospheric life with us into the great cosmos. And we're going to need to not just pack picnic lunches and canisters of oxygen. We're going to need to figure out how to make living worlds on other planets in orbit, etc. So this is a very early ground-based, attempt to find out what we know and what we don't know about how to build living support systems. And the third one, when you make an artificial world, a human designed and created world, you have to substitute for a lot that nature provides for free. We had to have apparatuses to produce waves and winds and, the global climate change, climate environment that our biosphere does. So we knew that we would be pioneering environmental technologies. And the two that I'm most excited about was what we came up with for purifying air and making sure that we didn't have the equivalent of the worst sick building syndrome ever developed. Because compared to a modern, tightly sealed office or home, Biosphere 2 is orders of magnitude tighter. We only exchanged 1% of our atmosphere every month. So it was quite an extraordinary engineering feat that our amazing team of ecologists and engineers produced. And the other technology was that constructed wetland system for sewage treatment. And it was kind of revolutionary then, although it had been, circulating for some decades. Now there are constructed wetlands and manuals on how to build them all over the place. Virtually every European country has manuals. The EPA has signed off because the wonderful thing, even though they look very simple, they're simple because they're natural. And natural systems have an incredible complexity that has been given to them. So that was another really exciting technology, and it spurred, my continuing involvement 30 years later with this.
So maybe paint a picture for those who will never have the experience of being inside there and the layout of the place, right? You had models for the basic large scale biomes of the planet, like you said, savannas, deserts, different configurations of
Right.
forests. And I'm curious,
Rainforest.
okay, so you are in an airtight building that encapsulates these, but what is the connection between these manufactured biomes inside? Are they separated or are they all open to one another?
Well, we had some separation between what we call the wilderness biomes. That was the rainforest, savanna, fog desert, mangrove marsh, kind of an Everglades system, and our little mini ocean with a living coral reef that we collected off of Mexico. Because we didn't want some of the insects that were in those systems to get into our farm and living quarters. But in terms of the global circulation, the water cycle was connected, the air was connected. It was really one metabolic uh, apparatus, and it was really beautiful. It was kind of like if we have the hubris or the gumption, or in Yiddish, the chutzpah to to decide to make the world's first mini biosphere. Our architect said it's got to be beautiful, and it's kind of an homage to world architecture. And people, certainly if they're in the United States, they can go to Arizona, and the University of Arizona now owns and operates the facility and take tours, educational tours. But there's some resources. There are the two books that you mentioned, Pushing Our Limits, and the two editions of Life Under Glass, the inside story of Biosphere 2. But there's also a pretty exciting movie that was released just before COVID called Spaceship Earth, that captures some of the backstory of the group that I was describing, the Ecotechnics people, because we had an interesting lifestyle. We wanted to work on ecology, theater, and enterprise, and kind of, live a fairly balanced life. And it covers Biosphere 2. So that's Spaceship Earth that, is available on streaming services. And also that there are a number of documentaries. There's an Ecotechnics channel on YouTube. And there's one, I think it's called An Architectural Singularity, which has got just a beautiful, no narrative, but a steady cam video tour of the inside of Biosphere 2, because it's hard to visualize. And when I say it, 2.5 acres, it's, I think, the size of two soccer fields, in terms of footprint. But it was a magnificent world, both with the architecture, step ziggurats, and pyramids, and barrel vaults, and the ceilings. In the rainforest, we planned this experiment to last for 100 years. So, the top of the rainforest is some 25 meters above ground. It was a very spacious world. It wasn't like a claustrophobic world. And because it was open to sunlight, it was largely sunlight driven. We could see outside, and to our great surprise, Biosphere 2, it was a private venture that enabled us to move really rapidly, because my institute had had conferences and done these innovative projects. We knew a really great cadre of ecologists and engineers, because it was a really large team that designed and made Biosphere 2 successful. But it was going to be a quiet R&D spot. And then a few magazines, I think it was like European Geo, that, as you mentioned, we, of course, like all projects, build a model. They took the Biosphere 2 model out of the building, put it up against the natural backdrop, and it looked for all the world like we'd already built Biosphere 2. And then word got out, and I think it sort of tapped into a need that we have. We humans are always questioning, like, who are we? What is the world that we live in? And at the time that we built the project, people could barely spell the word biosphere.
Hmm.
Literally. I know that because the project was called Biosphere 2, and the company, the joint venture behind it, was called Space Biospheres Ventures, and I had to spell that continually. Now everyone can at least spell the word biosphere, although I think the full implications that of living in a biosphere. So we called the crew, as you may or may not know, biospherians.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't econauts or bionauts, and it was a great name. I didn't come up with it, but somebody working on the project did. Because when you think about it, okay, Oliver, you may be in Catalonia, and I'm here in New Mexico, and our listeners may be in Rio and New York, Tokyo, Beijing, who knows? But we have one thing in common. We are all biospherians of Biosphere 1. And what are the implications of that? I think we're just beginning, to find out, and it's kind of like you begin to value something when it's endangered.
Sure.
So, I take it as kind of a global wake up call. It's not just global climate change and global climate weirding and all that. It's the overall assault and callousness that modern cultures, modern, if we call them civilizations, the disregard we have for the sanctity of our biosphere. And for heaven's sake, it is our life support system.
Yeah.
So when I give talks, I liken, what's been happening with our biosphere is if, and Bucky Fuller, of course, came up with Spaceship Earth. Here we are on this beautiful planet that is a spaceship. It's traveling like every object in space, around our sun. Our solar system is embedded in our, all of that. And here's the crew trying to destructively test our life support system. That's what the assault on the biosphere amounts to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really an interesting moment to be alive and to be a biospherian, an ex-biospherian, in my case, a Biosphere 2, but a current biospherian of our global biosphere. Is like, hey guys, I think we need to rethink how we're operating.
Indeed.
There's something really, really important that we're missing here. And it's really simple. And I've had colleagues, and I finally really got why they don't like the word environment and environmentalist, because that kind of gives you the illusion that you are here inside your little bubble, your human, bodily form, your human community, your city, and you have the illusion that you're like an independent vector. No,
Yeah.
you are every breath of air that you take is a product of the biosphere. Every drop of water has been cleansed and recleansed by the bio. It's amazing how metabolically connected we are.
Yeah.
And even if you're in illusion that you aren't connected, you are.
Yeah,
It's
despite
a
some
it's a
people's best efforts of, sitting in front of their screens at home and rarely going outside, it doesn't disconnect you. It just creates a larger barrier of illusion of disconnection, which is often serving to remove us from the consciousness necessary to participate in this more actively, as we all should. And so this
yeah.
strikes me as a really profound insight that you've gained, not only through your work, but through your observations, just, as a biospherian of Biosphere 1, right? I'm curious as to this experience, not only in your studies and your research with the biosphere itself, but in your work afterwards too. What have been some of your biggest learnings and takeaways in working with this from an engineering perspective of how material, how resources cycle within the biosphere?
Well, it's a huge question, right? And kind of one of the reasons that I like Wastewater Gardens and was motivated to get involved in it is because what I felt, and I was a good tree hugger, for a city boy, for 20 years before going into Biosphere 2, but Biosphere 2 kind of really got me, as you're mentioning. I think we're all in illusion if we're not aware of our connection with the biosphere. I mean, we're literally sleepwalking and in a fantasy, because the reality is that, as it's been, for every human generation, but previous human generations lived closer to nature. And, all of the ancient religions and belief systems kind of started with the premise that the earth is sacred, and the connection of people who, were farmers, were hunter gatherers, whatever. It was really clear. I mean, it's only in our technocratic and highly urbanized world that people, can even harbor this illusion. I love it. I found out some years ago that in Japan, it's a widely practiced type of therapy is to go and spend time in a forest.
Forest bathing, yeah.
Forest healing. And I can relate to that. I mean, I grew up in Queens with some beautiful parks, and you know, just picture your city and your favorite city park and what a difference it makes to be, in the embrace, so to speak, of trees and running water and, beautiful breezes and all that. So, scientifically, I did know that I wanted to do these systems because they connect people, and they get them out of the illusion that water mysteriously comes when you open up a tap or a shower or
Yeah.
whatever. And, it just disappears into the void when you flush it down a drain or pull the chain on your toilet. This is part of the reality. And if you have a beautiful constructed wetland that you go out and, my God, I've just flushed the toilet, and okay, it may go through a septic tank. We're not all that geared to love, which we should, the microbes that keep our biosphere operating. But we're sure, every human being, unless they're seriously damaged, loves plants. They speak to us, the flowers, the forms, even forgetting the fact that they're producing our oxygen. So I really wanted to connect people with that, and I needed to get the tools. So I did a master's in watershed ecology at the University of Arizona. And then happily, we had gotten to know two of the great system ecologists, Eugene Odom and Howard T. Odom. And I went with H.T. Odom at the University of Florida and did a PhD in environmental engineering. And for that PhD, my dissertation was kind of a nice karmic payback. We had collected the coral reef for Biosphere 2 down in the Yucatan Peninsula off a little town called Acamal, maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours from Cancun. And so I went down there because I knew, from talking to the people we met, that there was no sewage treatment. There's a beautiful coral reef and there's limestone. And all of the pollution that was created by wastewater was impacting those coral reefs. So we started by doing, and I think we wound up doing about 20 systems for houses, businesses, and hotels in Acamal. And then, the great fun I've had over the succeeding decades is taking these systems to new countries. And that sharpens, you're asking about what you learn. Well, among because it's a natural system, your choice of plants is dictated by the local climate, the amount of rainfall, the extreme heat, the extreme cold, so you're designing systems that are adapted to that. And also, as we kind of remember from our high school biology, every 10 degrees of increase of temperature, like life goes twice as fast. Is in tropical and warm climates, you can make your wastewater gardens far smaller than you do in cold climates. And we've done systems. I have colleagues in a branch of wastewater gardens, even in Poland, in the Carpathian Mountains. So, they're beautiful systems. And I've learned so much about the types of wetland plants that make these systems go, because now we've worked in 14 countries around the world.
So going back to when you were studying this, before you started to do projects out in the field, what were your inspirations? Where did you draw information and ideas from when creating these constructed wetlands and wastewater gardens? Because as a concept, this has existed for a long time. I mean, people didn't have flushable toilets and septic systems very far back. And this has been incorporated into peripheries of population zones around houses and such in previous times. Where did you draw your inspiration from?
Well, as you say it, the modern flush toilet is a relatively recent invention. And it's kind of interesting. We sometimes talk, and I love the word paradigm. Maybe it's overused, but a paradigm is kind of the perspective that you bring to something. And, so you have to envision how nasty, as cities got larger and larger and there was no sewage treatment system. Pigs were cleaning up a lot of the waste and
Yeah.
shit in New York City into the first decade of the 20th century. Well, the people who invented the centralized sewage treatment plant, they were motivated by the current paradigm was centralized like factories. So a sewage treatment plant is like a centralized factory for detoxifying because sewage is dangerous. It can carry diseases as well as doing environmental damage. In fact, you know, a lot of people in the West don't realize that untreated sewage and the sewage contamination of potable water causes probably more death than any other single factor on the planet. And
Yeah.
it's really, really sad because it hits poor people and the young children die of diarrhea because they get dehydrated. Because anyway,
Yeah.
so
No, I mean, all throughout history, plagues and pandemics often came from improper treatment of waste and water.
right, right. So I mean, I don't condemn, but they were working with the paradigm only to think about wastewater sewage as a danger, as a pathogen spreader.
Yeah.
They weren't considering, and so getting it away from people, whatever it costs, all that pumping and pipelines and whatnot, to make it safe. But they weren't realizing, and I actually got my degree at the University of Arizona in a wonderful school since renamed, but it was called the School of Renewable Natural Resources. And when you think about it, if you're going to have people anywhere, we're going to be eating and we are going to be, delivering that product out the other ends. So it's a renewable natural resource. And especially in the world facing water scarcity, sewage treatment plants and your flush toilet are using fresh water. So to throw that away and dump, at the end of all of that expense at a sewage treatment plant, just to dump that water into the ocean or back into aquifers or rivers is just such a waste, and it's not doing anything productive with that. So constructed wetland, my inspiration really is it's a change, it's a paradigm change. And even it's a shameful word, wastewater.
Yeah.
It's right embedded. Why are we wasting water? And it's not only the water, it's the perfect fertilizer.
Hmm.
Humans are so well designed that our waste products are incredible fertilizers, for plants and soil microbes and everyone to digest and make use of, and in process detoxify. So it's a total paradigm change. And we were really, among my inspirations, and I do a tip of the hat to this wonderful visionary scientist who was working in a NASA center, Billy Wolverton. Billy Wolverton, at this center in Mississippi, had convinced the director of the center, because they did rocket fuels and built the external tank of the space shuttle. They had all this really nasty industrial wastewater that, rather than spending millions and millions of dollars on some technocratic chemical treatment, just give Billy $10,000 or $20,000 and he will build these constructed wetlands. And wetland plants not only can make use of domestic wastewater, but they can take heavy metals and chemical pollution out of the water. So we enlisted him to help us design the sewage treatment system for Biosphere 2. He's also famous, by the way, because he did pioneering work on how plants take out air pollution from indoor spaces. And the fact that you see the spider plant in, like, it's a cliche here in the United States in every restaurant you go
Yeah, yeah,
to.
yeah.
And they're beautiful plants, but Billy, I think, originally checked 15 or 20 plants, and the spider plant was one of the star. All plants take out things from the atmosphere, and their soils also help. Anyway, so Billy, working with Billy Wolverton, who was a great inspiration.
Yeah, so let's go into some of the technical aspects of creating a wastewater garden now. What are some of the important, let's say, defining features or the components that are necessary to make one of these function well?
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it schematically as having three stages. So you need to analyze how much wastewater am I getting and what are the concentrations of it, right? So and then you're looking at, in this environment, to what standard do we need it cleaned?
Yeah.
So one way or another, you're going to have primary treatment, which separates the solids and starts letting microbes digest them. So you want to, make all of the sewage go through primary treatment and become liquid to where it can go through the constructed wetland.
Is this
And the
removing
use
or dissolving solid matter then?
well, it's actually digesting them. So, your famous septic tank, and for larger systems that they have different iterations of it, but basically it's an anaerobic chamber where you can let the wastewater sit for at least one day, but I like to design it for 2, 3, or 4 day residence time, because the more complete that primary digestion is, the better the later components work. And then you go to your second stage, and that's the constructed wetland, the wastewater garden itself. And we want to contain that. Now it's only been preliminarily treated. It's still got lots of organic matter, lots of nutrients, and lots of pathogens, etc. They've been reduced somewhat. So you want to seal it, and we use, either like you're making a water garden, a geomembrane. EPDM that Firestone makes is a really nice one to work with. Or in countries where I've worked, where labor costs are really low and you don't want to be importing materials, like in Mexico and Bali and some other places, we've actually, in Algeria, we actually make that seal with concrete. I remember having to explain to our contractors, we're making a new kind of swimming pool.
Mhm.
It's not going to be for people bathing. It's a swimming pool that we can hold the sewage in. So it's got to be watertight. And then we fill it up with gravel, whatever the locally available thing is. And then the only soil that goes into it is what is around the root balls of the plants that you put in, that are adapted to the climate. So in a way, it's almost like hydroponics. And that, as I was mentioning before, the beauty of animal wastes is that they are loaded with nitrogen and phosphorus and all these good organic matters that both the root zone of the plants and the plants themselves flourish on. So it's, the plants in a constructed wetland and a wastewater garden, they kind of like are really growing rapidly because they've got everything they need, plenty of water, plenty of nutrients. And this was the big jump that I made. In ordinary thinking, and it's really sad, even if you go and see a constructed wetland, they tend to be monocultures. So they're sometimes called reed beds. They
Mhm.
might have one or two types of wetland plants. In almost all cases, after the constructed wetland itself, they just discharge the water. And because we started working along that very solid limestone, geology, Yucatan coast with a coral reef offshore, we realized that we couldn't just throw away that water because that water still has nutrients. So that was the big jump that I made, conceptually, is what we're trying to do is not just detoxify and make beautiful gardens and all that stuff with the constructed wetland. We're trying to use as close to 100% of that water and its nutrients. And, after the constructed wetland, then we do kind of ecoscaping using the water with all its nutrients to create even more greenery. And it not only is productive use of the wastewater, but it means that less of those nutrients are going to go either into the coastal environment or into groundwater, etc. So yeah, it was that's the third stage. And the beautiful thing is in the constructed wetland, in the wastewater garden, you do have to use wetland adapted plants. We've done a lot of creative investigations and more plants than you'd think can actually thrive there. But in the final stage, you can do anything. And, one of our projects, for example, in Poland, at a research facility that the university had in the mountains, after our septic tank wastewater garden, that water was led into an existing apple orchard. And so those fruit trees are benefiting from more water and the nutrients they carry. So you can be really creative in it, but, total reuse of the water. And now given, so there's the greenhouse gases that it costs so much less greenhouse emissions to build a wastewater garden. Because they're natural, they last for decades and decades and decades. And the really sad thing about these highly technical sewage treatment plants is if you get 15 or 20 years of operation, you're lucky. So they last much longer, and they are creating landscape and greenery. You can put harvestable plants into the wastewater garden and into that final third stage that you can harvest: flowers, wood, weaving materials, et cetera, et cetera. So you're also getting direct benefit instead of it being a cost. And the real selling point and why constructed wetlands are spreading around the planet is that the operating costs are like 5 or 10% that of a highly technical system. So you have, you're saving greenhouse gases in that longevity as well.
That's incredible. And so what are all of the different applications in which these wastewater gardens can be applied? We're talking about replacements for septic systems. Are there others that you've pioneered?
Well, they're not a replacement for a septic system. A septic system, is a good technology if people don't abuse it. Septic tanks, get destroyed because people are dumping chemicals unthinkingly down their drains,
Sure.
which are
so this is more of an add-on to the effluent flow afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the beauty of constructed wetlands is you can, as I was mentioning with the Billy Wolverton NASA explanation, you can use it for industrial wastewater treatment. You can do it for agribusiness. If it's a concentrated, dairy or piggery or whatever, or a processing plant. And sometimes, a wastewater garden is not the be all and end all and cure all. So it might be part of a chain of treatment. But if you can use constructed wetlands because of their low cost of construction and long life and low cost of operation, your entire stream is way down. So, so I haven't personally done it, but there's huge literature about mining waste, that constructed wetlands are an interface so the discharge from mining operations aren't harmful. So, the applications are as varied as the types of waste. Domestic waste is almost the easiest, but in cities now, and it's kind of a pity that we set up our engineering, our infrastructure that way, the industries that are within cities often just discharge their waste into the shared sewage system. So the nice thing about these natural systems, like those air purifiers using plants and soils, whatever the pollutants are in the air, the microbial population that can deal with it will increase. Well, the same, and this isn't like you go to the store and you have to buy different microbes. We live in a world that is so microbially diverse. As I was mentioning, the microbes are probably the real champions who keep the biosphere operating. We're starting to learn that right now. Now we talk about the inner microbial biome that makes us,
Sure.
even human organisms, operate. Same thing with the wastewater garden. The beauty about constructed wetlands is that in that root zone, whatever the waste products have, the microbes that can deal with it, and a constructed wetland is both anaerobic and aerobic. That's the magic of wetland plants, is they're pumping oxygen through their root system and creating really micro zones of aerobic bacteria. So it's a really complex factory. Again, it's the kind of thing that if you hired a bunch of expensive engineers and you gave them, you can go online and buy the right microbes. The cost of humans replicating what nature is doing would be really formidable. And we've gained an appreciation. Sometimes let's call them nature protectors, or exaggerate.
Hmm.
But this idea that wetlands are the kidneys of the planet is actually really based in real science and real knowledge. And that's why wetlands, are on the sides of rivers and in coastal regions. And they have a great ability to detoxify the water that they're in. They're also, we've now discovered, wetlands are even better carbon um, sinks than rainforests.
Mm.
Per acre so the protection of wetlands, which is also dear to my heart. I worked at the University of Florida at their Center for Wetlands, and we got to, Florida is as flat as a pancake, and if you have the depression 6 inches deep, you have a wetland. It's really a remark. So, I've been in wetlands of all kinds and totally fell in love with them.
Hmm.
Wetlands are pretty formidable. And what I love about wastewater gardens is, just like we had a human designed biosphere, you have the engineer working to figure out, okay, how much wastewater, how concentrated is it, how clean do we need to get it, through its process. You have the engineer working, but they're basically, the tools are what nature has perfected over billions of years.
Well, so what have you seen as the limitations then of what can go through a wastewater garden as far as chemicals or other inputs that may test the limits of what can be biologically broken down? Are there kind of parameters or things that you would not recommend
Yeah,
filtering this way?
because it's a living system. If the waste is too concentrated, then plants and microbes aren't going to be able. So sometimes you may have to have a preliminary step to dilute the material before it goes in. And nothing is perfect. And also, if you're using the constructed wetland, for example, to take heavy metals out of some industrial waste stream, then you need to think about, what are you going to do, with that plant material? Because
When
that
it
plant
concentrates in the
material,
plant body, yeah.
yeah, the plants concentrate them. Well, you could then dilute it further by maybe composting it, but you need to be careful about that. And like everything, we don't know everything about what constructed wetlands can do. And I'm not up on, it's a great fear in cities that some new pathogens, are not totally killed by constructed wetlands or by even conventional sewage treatment plants. I think that's why at the end of those systems they throw in chlorine
Yeah.
or ozone to basically sterilize it. I hate doing that because that's a pretty expensive thing. And if you're dealing with domestic sewage, just from houses, just from toilets and showers and laundries, you're not dealing with that kind of concentrate. But, like everything, there's limits. You may have to pre-treat it, and you may have to have further steps, perhaps. I mean, maybe mining of the future, will find a way to, if you've taken all the titanium and lead and whatever out of the waste stream, maybe we can reclaim it and put it to productive use. I think there are people actually working with microbes that can make vitamins and concentrate useful products. So yeah,
Yeah, it's
there are
wild what's coming
limits.
out now.
Yeah, it's a wild thing, but I do have to emphasize, and we, the nice thing about taking this technology to new countries is that, you know because it is kind of a foreign object to a lot of health officials, they require, and I like to do research to see how the systems are going. And we tend to get 99 or 99.8% reduction of fecal coliforms, which is kind of a generic for what are they doing to potential pathogens.
Yeah.
But you're not going to drink it, even if it has 0.001%, of what it originally had.
Sure,
So
and
I'm
you
not
would
really
design it differently if the objective was to produce potable water through these systems, but this isn't the main objective of the gardens in and of themselves. That might be a later stage filtration.
Yeah, and I know people are doing that, and the water crunch is hitting, a lot of places in the world. I'm not against it. It's just that that requires a whole other set of procedures, which cost, both energy, machinery, and and capital to create those things. Um, I mean, my feeling is that there is so much water that is wasted that if we just start conserving water intelligently, including you imagine, at least in the United States, 50% of the potable water gets used for watering outside plants. And that is just insane. You know, so I'm very sympathetic. And when I left Florida, there was a couple of cities that were starting to take the outflow, the treated wastewater from sewage treatment plants, put them in an infrastructure, maybe with different colored pipes. So the brown pipes, are recycled water. So so much of what we do on the planet is just insane. Is totally insane. Why you take potable water and then like water your garden with it when it doesn't, it's potable because they have taken all the nutrients out of it. Wastewater is perfect for that, and it costs less energy to use it for that purpose. So, in a way, you could think of that third stage I was describing in the wastewater garden as that's our, recycled water now feeding plants.
Yeah.
And it's so much better than potable water because we don't have to go out and buy fertilizer. The fertilizer has been sent by the
Yeah,
people who are
absolutely.
using the system. Yeah,
It is really bizarre how much energy we put into potable water and what most of it gets used for, to say nothing about, flushing it down a toilet to begin with. Now,
right.
you have mentioned throughout this discussion very briefly some of the other projects that you have set up around the world, a long list of countries that we could go through. I'm wondering if perhaps we could pick one of your choice that we could break down into how you started to plan it and kind of how it has developed over time.
Well, Chris, the one that's really hot on my radar right now is our modest product project in southern Iraq. It's called the Eden in Iraq project, and there's a website if you Google Eden in Iraq. But it's designed for treating the waste of a really unique culture, the Marsh Arabs, who've lived, they've lived in the area very, very harmoniously with what was originally one of the largest marshlands in the world. And they build their buildings out of the reeds. They have They're water buffalo that graze on the reeds, and they get their milk from them. It's beautiful, beautiful culture, but no, again, no sewage treatment. And now that the marsh Arabs are living in cities, it's really sad. The waste from their houses and businesses are just flowing into this is the also the cradle of civilization between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. So now that waste is going into the Euphrates and polluting the marshes, which are under a lot of threat from climate change and from pollution and upstream water diversion. So the Eden and Iraq project is a fairly large scale for me and my team. It's a 6.5 acre, 2.5 hectare area that will have pre-treatment, a open water marsh vegetation that's already been constructed, and we're doing fundraising for the rest of the project. But this will treat the waste of eight eight to 10,000 people in the largest city in Iraq. So we have been working with our Iraqi partners from Nature Iraq, which is the first environmental NGO in that country. And they've succeeded in getting the marshes declared Iraq's first national park. And what's really wonderful is that I've been there 3 times, and my team continue to go there, is we've done workshops with engineers and ecologists in the Iraqi government at all levels, from provincial to state to national, educating about this. And the water minister, devoted the resources to create the first part of this treatment system. And when he did the ribbon cutting, it was also a surprise to us. He got the lesson really well, because he said this should be the beginning of many of these wastewater gardens throughout the country. And even big cities like Baghdad, they have what looks like a functioning sewage treatment plant. But as I saw a lot in my travels in the wonderful world of shit treatment, so I should give a plug to the Wastewater Gardener, Preserving the Planet One Flush at a Time. I love that subtitle.
Yeah.
Which was the book I wrote in 2014. Yeah, the adventures I've had going around the world it's really sad. Even when communities have built these high-tech systems, they often don't have the resources to keep changing parts and the technicians to keep them going. So even big cities in Iraq don't have effective sewage treatment. So he cut the ribbon on the Eden and Iraq project and he listed 8 other sites where he wanted to see wastewater gardens going. So we're in dialogue with the United Nations World Food Program, because you can very easily tie wastewater gardens into production of crops. That
Yes.
third stage could be, maybe you make the wastewater garden even smaller, because you don't want to take away the nutrients.
Sure.
You want to have them available to. So there are all kinds of beautiful permutations that you can do.
Yeah.
And as you're mentioning too, I think it's kind of crazy to have flush toilets, but the infrastructure in a lot of the world is that way. So this is how you can make those kind of a bad idea really better. But new ways of directly separating your waste from water, composting toilets and the rest of it, or just simply collecting that material and then composting it to detoxify it and make it available for plants is so much a better way to do it.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
they've calculated if everybody in the world had a flush toilet and tried to flush their toilets, we don't have enough water.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So,
incredibly
so I
wasteful. And though there all are alternatives, it's good to know that there are retrofits or add-ons that you can put to an existing system to at least recover the value both in nutrient and water on the end.
Yeah, totally. And personally, let's go back to the biosphere thing of being connected. The really amazing thing about 2 years inside Biosphere 2 is that it was continually a bodily knowledge that you had, because you could walk around that system in 15 minutes. and literally see all the plants that, are keeping you alive, is I love it when we put in systems and then people fall in love with their wastewater gardens.
Mm.
And then it becomes a very personal thing. And, I remember there was an Italian restaurant down in the Mexican coast, actually now the fashionable town of Tulum. And the guy was like, "Oh, I need to clean my oven." He was on the phone. And I'm really afraid that my oven cleaner is going to damage, the beautiful wastewater garden that I have. So connecting people with the reality of where their water comes from and where the water that they've made use of is going, that's to me like the icing on the cake.
Yeah, yeah.
If
It
we're
really
not
breeds a
connected to the
connection with the entirety of a cycle rather than seeing
right.
it as a linear thing that gets solved by somebody else and isn't part of what you're involved with.
Yeah, at the end of wastewater garden, I came up with the fecosphere, the fecosphere meditation, which is, on whatever a composting toilet or flush toilet, when you're sitting there, let's contemplate, where is the water come that I'm going to flush this toilet with? And where's it going to go? I mean, you know, I think every city resident should go make a trip to their sewage treatment plant, you know,
Yeah.
and actually discover that, since I did my master's in University of Arizona, I was in the city of Tucson, and they have two centralized sewage treatment plants, and the only 24-hour 12-month a year rivers that flow in Tucson are largely effluent from the sewage treatment plant.
No kidding.
No kidding. And so these shit rivers, especially in arid regions, are a whole other phenomena. And you look at that whole system and you're thinking, what value are we getting aside from detoxifying it and keep, I mean, in the case of Tucson, they're pumping the water 15 and 20 miles
Yeah.
with really elaborate pump stations, which leak and are polluting the groundwater. Yeah, anyway, getting connected to even a little piece of the biospheric reality that you inhabit is so interesting. I mean, I think, starting to get grounded and learning even the little bit, we all know those diagrams of the global water cycle. But
Hmm.
I love one is that, the ones that I'd learned, didn't actually even show humans and factories and cities.
Right.
But even if you see a more updated one, like, where do I stand in it? What does my city do? My town? What happens, when we started doing those systems in Mexico, and I've seen this around the world, people don't even know where their septic tank is.
Yeah.
And in Mexico, we discovered, like we have in many developing countries, there are no bottoms to the septic tanks.
Ah,
That's why
sure.
we,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're basically
isn't that
dry wells.
convenient?
Yeah.
We don't even need to pump it out because it's flowing out into, in this case, the coral reef.
Yeah.
And then
Or the
we're out
groundwater
there
at
at,
least.
yeah, and then we're out there. We heard these stories about brown trout. It took me a while to figure out what they were talking about. But, since ecotourism and snorkeling and diving are big draws, yeah, you're swimming with the fact that, septic tanks didn't have. So we would have to start with, where is your septic tank? Is it big enough for your house? And let's seal it as
Yeah.
a starter.
Yeah. Wild. So let's go into some of the practical considerations for someone considering adding a wastewater garden to an existing septic system. And I can give real experience from this because it's something I'm considering doing for my house right now.
Right.
Where would I start in getting the necessary information to start creating a design? And what are some key considerations when putting one in?
Yeah, I mean, as I was mentioning, you need to figure out, well, how many people are living there? What's the water use? If you have a septic tank, you could pump it out and then measure how quickly it refills, or just use some rule of thumbs, of the type of lifestyle you're living. And the nice thing about, these constructed wetlands is they're pretty flexible. the fact that you have a dinner party, once in a month or whatever, doesn't mean that you have to double the size of your wastewater garden. Just like a hotel, we like to find out what's peak occupancy, what are the
Sure.
slow times, figure out, so you need to do calculations of how much water you've got. Is your septic tank adequate? Is it well sealed? Maybe put a filter on the back of it because that improves the functioning of the septic tank. It's now obligatory in new septic tank systems in the United States and I think Europe and elsewhere. And then, where could I buy you? I hate machinery, frankly. Even though I have engineering in my degree, I'm more an ecologist. I hate having to put in pumps. So, is there any way that we could find an area that by gravity flow we can put a constructed wetland in? And so often to do that, it's worth it to have a slightly sunken garden rather than having to put a pump, which is going to be an electrical cost, and sooner or later you're going to have to replace it. Where can I take it, and what do I want the constructed wetland to look like? So in some cases, you can design long and narrow ones, and they can become kind of a privacy barrier, or shading other parts of your backyard, etc. But you need to, and those areas need to be in fairly full sunlight. So is that possible, or are some trees going to have to be trimmed? So you go through the process of where you're going to locate it, depending on the initial calculations of how much water you're dealing with. And then there's some, just straight up engineering. You're going to need to find out in that soil, as this is especially for the third stage, how quickly does water get absorbed in that soil? Because what we really want to avoid is any of that wastewater surfacing, because then there's odor, there's accidental contact that you need to worry about. So you have to do some permeability studies. They may be available because probably other hydrologists and engineers have looked at soils in your area. So there's a big difference. If it's a sandy soil, then water goes through quite rapidly. Here, in New Mexico, we have a lot of very heavy clay soils. So that will affect the sizing as well of the wastewater garden and the third stage. But it's not rocket science. It's fairly simple calculations. There are simple ways. It's kind of fun, get yourself back into your 5-year-old mind. You can take some of your soil and get it wet. And if it's a clay soil, you can make little cute ribbons out of it. If it falls apart, then you have loam or sandy soils. Yeah, so I mean, there's some, fairly simple, ways that you can do these calculations.
And like you were
And then,
mentioning, no, sorry, go ahead, continue.
yeah, I just wanted to throw out there that also, the really elegant thing is if you have a number of houses that are close to each other, that maybe you create one wastewater garden and run, hopefully by gravity flow, a cluster of houses to one shared wastewater garden.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it
spread the
becomes
investment.
and it becomes yeah, it makes it cheaper for everyone. And then, since these are beautiful, yeah, I should say that about the Eden and Iraq project. This isn't going to be like that nasty, smelly sewage treatment plant that you will find in the poor part of the town. And I remember when I was looking as a student to rent a house in Tucson, there were ones that were really inexpensive, and then I realized they're downwind from the sewage treatment plant. Yeah. But so when you make a wastewater garden, you're creating a beautiful park, a garden
Yeah.
that is going to be, so in Eden and Iraq, for example, we have beautiful pathways. It's going to be an homage to marsh culture. We're going to have shade structures, and we're going to do a kind of classical image in Islam. They have a beautiful image of the world as four rivers that come together. So
Mm.
you can also really make your systems artistic. I should give a shout out in Algeria, and we were influenced by an artist that shows at the October Gallery, which is the Ecotechnics project in London. And he suggested, let's make the wastewater garden in the shape of a crescent moon.
Hmm.
And it's really beautiful. I mean, even from satellite imagery, you can see our wastewater garden in this Algerian town. And, because that's a culturally significant Islamic symbol.
Yeah.
And it worked perfectly hydrologically. So I kind of love that when you can make things. We did a system for the Indonesian, the equivalent of the Environmental Protection Agency, and they suggested it, and it worked. For the water treatment, we made their wastewater garden in the shape of a fish.
Oh, amazing.
So they're really fun things you can do with it.
That's always important to mention that, you can go beyond the mere function of something and really create a focal point for imitation and inspiration beyond just what it can do for the environment.
Yeah, I should also mention, just like Biosphere 2 started out as a quiet R&D place, and then the world got excited, and we reached so many hundreds of millions of people. In Akamal, that town in the Yucatan where we started doing these systems, our systems, started to be replicated because they were the best looking gardens in town.
Mm.
The town water supply is somewhat saline, and there's a lot of salt breeze from the ocean. And so, we had those, all kinds of beautiful tropical plants, banana trees, papayas, canna lilies, in the gardens. The entire family of bird of paradise,
Hmm.
the heliconias, work in wastewater gardens. So you can make them really, really beautiful. And of course, you want to.
Yeah.
So it's since the paradigm has changed, and we're not going to hide the sewage treatment somewhere.
Yeah.
It's actually going to be a feature, and it's going to make you feel so good. The really funny thing is that we did a series of 9 for a eco tourism facility, and the people just loved the idea. And it was like, don't hold it in. Don't wait to go to the bathroom when you get back to your hotel. Use the restaurant bathroom, and then look outside, and all those plants are enjoying the fact that you're feeding them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
you're going to go snorkeling, and you're not going to run into brown trout. I mean, how good a picture is that?
Absolutely. There's all sorts of stories that you can tell with this as well. And incentivize engagement, in the simplest way, like using the bathroom at the facility, but also giving the inspiration to explore and interact with, identify plants, maybe understand what can be grown through here. How can you can cycle the nutrients back into your food supply system. And then, like you said, the cultural elements and the beauty of the garden, it's really endless.
Thank you, Alva, because actually I should have mentioned that. And we've done projects, and I love doing these projects for schools because then they become an outdoor classroom. And
Mm,
we did one project working with the Mangrove Action Project, which is a great organization protecting mangroves around the planet. And this was in an island in Indonesia. And the Indonesian mangroves are really botanically rich. There's a lot more variety there. I love mangrove systems anyway. So we actually, just to make it a classroom, we put mangrove species into that wastewater garden. So you can also show, people, here are those plants that you take for granted down there in the mangrove,
mm.
and see how beautiful they are. And they're also doing this great job of cleaning the sewage from this facility. It was a bamboo processing facility that we did that. So yeah, you can use these as kind of education of, you could make them all native wetland species from your state or region. So
Yeah.
they become also that, yeah.
Fantastic. And so I had one technical question too that I was thinking about, because a lot of what we've been mentioning right now is these really vibrant garden type systems, I assume mostly in warmer climates. But you did also mention the project you're doing in Poland, where I assume there's a good portion of the winter where it's frozen and not photosynthesizing. How do you design for that inevitability of the climate and make sure that it can still be used and still work when it's in the off season, when it's in the winter.
Yeah, if you check the literature, there are constructed wetland systems that operate perfectly well in Canada, in Minnesota, in really cold climates. We've done a few projects in Spain, actually, and France, where there's a winter not as severe as that. It went back to that idea that I was saying. In cold climates, you need to make the systems bigger, sometimes twice as big as you would in a tropical area. And very curiously, when the ground is frozen, well, one is you have gravel, you don't have soil. If there's a snow cover or an ice covering over it, the sewage treatment actually happens better because it's an insulation. And
Mm-hmm.
the water that comes out of houses and buildings is unfrozen. So these systems, even when it appears, even when the plants are dormant and there's snow on the ground, the microbes are still working. And so these systems in northern regions, if they're designed properly, will meet standards even during the winter months.
Okay, brilliant. It's just something that you design in for that inevitability.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's part of your initial analysis is what's the climate here,
Yeah.
which includes, both, okay, how hot does it get here in southern Iraq? It gets really bloody hot.
Yeah.
And how cold does it get? And if you're doing a system in Alaska or in Poland or in the mountains anywhere. Yeah. So these are like you know, this is part of the engineering. And I should give a shout out. And H.T. Odom is considered the father, but there's a wonderful emerging field called ecological engineering. And Biosphere 2 is a great example of an ecologically engineered facility. But there are these technologies, and constructed wetlands are a great example of them, that use engineering, to properly design the system for local conditions. But they're ecological in that the main functioning is done by natural mechanisms. So what the plants are doing would cost millions of dollars, in a sewage treatment plant, but those microbes don't need, they don't turn in a timesheet at the end of the week and say pay me overtime for working on the weekends. So
That's fortunate.
ecological engineering, that, and it's starting to be recognized as an academic discipline. And to my mind, the reason Biosphere 2 worked is that we got, really top engineers, excited to work on the project, and top ecologists. And then they had to learn how to speak to each other and to
Mm.
find a common language, which was really an interesting process to be part of. But that's the kind of thinking that we need really in rising to the biospheric challenge we have, which is, put very simply, how can we live really satisfying, complete human lives without harming and sustaining, regenerating our biosphere?
Yeah. Yeah. Marvelous. Well, look, we've covered a lot of ground here so far, and you've mentioned a lot of the organizations that you work directly with and that you've collaborated with in the past. Can you tell me how listeners who are interested to learn more and maybe even start a project like this themselves can find some of your resources and maybe even get in touch directly?
Sure. I mean, there, and maybe you could list. I'll send you a list of links to post. But Institute of Ecotechnics is kind of simple. Ecotechnics.edu. There's a website for wastewater gardens, wastewatergardens.com. Eden in Iraq has a website. Synergetic Press, which publishes some of my books, synergeticpress.com. And for a deeper dive, I should say, since we're mostly talking about wastewater gardens, I had so much fun both doing the research and travels and exploration of the world, the wonderful world of shit and how it's treated and misused on the planet. It's going to be the funniest book that you've ever read about the subject. And you mentioned, and thank you for mentioning that, the two books that I've written, one solo, Pushing Our Limits, Insights from Biosphere 2, University of Arizona Press. And then now there's two editions of Life Under Glass, And I was happy to write that with two of my teammates, two other biospherians. That's available through Synergetic Press. And welcome to the wonderful world of shit and biospherics.
And
And
all the potential within it. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And isn't it wonderful? If you listen to this podcast, you've learned what Biosphere 1 is, a little bit about Biosphere 2, and you discovered you are a biospherian. Now we
Hopefully
all
that's
have
an
to pack.
empowering message. I certainly feel it. And it's something that has really guided a lot of my inspiration, not only in this podcast, but my work outside as well, and is informing
Yeah.
a big part of the direction that I'm taking my own farm in here and all of the work with water that is involved with that.
Yeah, it's kind of like we are born as biospherians, but we can, if we understand that and start to understand the implications of it, that's kind of a beautiful, and everyone's looking for meaning in their life. Well, start to really contemplate that you're a biospherian and you are making a difference. And how could you more intelligently, consciously, joyfully make a difference to you, your circle, and the part of the biosphere that you impact?
It's a wonderful message for us here. Mark, I want to thank you so much for your time and for all of those resources that you listed, which I'll link to on the show notes for this episode. And I look forward to being in touch in the future. Maybe I'll reach out when I start this project of my own wastewater garden, hopefully in a year or two here.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you, Oliver. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks once again to Mark. You can find the links to his various companies and organizations, as well as his books, at the show notes on this episode and on the Synergetic Press website. Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account at regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.